ladies and gentlemen, we're here to think about how we can help each other continue to build freedom together in New South Wales. And I wanted to just very briefly highlight for you some of the successes and challenges that we've pulled out in the annual report that we've just published. So maybe a few things about progress that we highlight at the beginning. We've seen a 116% rise in reports to 1-800-FREEDOM, our hotline. We think that that's indicative of a slow trend towards reporting. We see a similar upward trend, of course, in the AFP numbers. Of course, I think we're still just scratching the surface and there's a lot of work to do there. There are now 34,000 government frontline workers receiving basic awareness training in modern slavery. And the New South Wales government has taken a number of important decisions to protect at-risk workers in the textile and cleaning sectors in particular. We're also seeing model tender clauses and contract clauses roll out across New South Wales public procurement. New clauses that change the approach in contracting in public procurement across New South Wales to encourage a shared responsibility approach rather than a warranty and representation approach. So there's some good signs of progress, but we also see key gaps emerging. If we could come on to the next slide. In particular, we're really concerned about the ongoing vulnerability that we see, driven in part by dodgy labour hire companies. About 40% of all of the reports we get to our little hotline have a connection to dodgy labour hire companies. I'm quite concerned, and I call out in the report, by the failure of the Department of Communities and Justice to meet the expectation in Section 19 of the Modern Slavery Act to create a system of support, including accommodation for victims of forced underage marriage. I called that to their attention specifically and formally a year ago. They have not acted on my recommendations, and if I don't see movement from them soon, I will be considering putting them on the public register of non-compliant entities in New South Wales. They'd be the first entry in that register. We see a continuing need for frontline workers to be trained, especially police, and not only at the federal level. People don't generally walk into the Australian Federal Police and report modern slavery. They have contact with state police. State police need to be able to recognise these offences when they're in front of them and understand what to do. And too often we see that when we share information with the state police, that's not working out the way we want it to. We have good conversations going with the police now, but it's my job to report to Parliament and to the public on progress, and I think that's an area that needs more attention, and we'll be putting more effort into it. And then we also call attention to the general fragility of the resourcing of states' anti-slavery efforts, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. I think the core of my report this year is really a call for much greater urgency from the New South Wales government to address these gaps. The next year, I would say, is really going to test whether the government is truly committed, not just in rhetoric but in action, to building freedom together. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see these are actually the recommendations from last year. Don't worry too much about the text. The important part is the traffic light colours on the right. Traditional traffic light colours, green means yes, they're on it, orange means meh, something's happening, but probably not enough. And then you see quite a lot of red there, which means no action has been taken in the last year by the addressees of that recommendation, nearly all of which were addressed to the New South Wales government. So to me, this is indicative of the fact that we're not seeing the commitment and the action from New South Wales government that's needed to create system change. So we have a number of recommendations in the annual report, and I just wanted to take a moment to go into those in some detail. I've got my magic stick of power here. Let's see if it works. There we go. So first, we'd like to see New South Wales immediately introduce labour hire regulation by the end of the year. This could involve a commitment to a single national hire regulation framework or a homegrown solution. There's been a conversation about a harmonised national approach going for several years. It's not going anywhere fast, and in the meantime, we have people reporting to us who who are ending up on the Support for Traffic People program basically because they're being exploited by dodgy labour hire companies, some of which are moving to New South Wales from other states because we don't have regulation. So we think workers face very real and urgent risks right now, and the government should have something in place to protect them. As an interim solution, for example, that could simply be a mutual recognition scheme while the government thinks about a longer-term arrangement. Second, we'd like to see the government adopt more of a whole-of-government approach to anti-slavery. So that means a couple of things. We'd like to see a cross-government department coordination mechanism put in place. There's no single actor within the New South Wales government currently responsible for coordinating practical response rather than legislative response. And clearly a number of the things that survivors need are services which New South Wales government plays a really important role in. Health, housing, to some extent legal aid, and other things as well. So we'd like to see a coordination mechanism, but we would also like to see the government commit to appropriate resourcing. At the moment, there is not a single dollar allocated in the New South Wales state budget to anti-slavery work specifically. So our work, this conference, is funded at the discretion of the Department of Communities and Justice, the very same department that I said may be about to become the first department listed in the Public Register of Non-Compliant Entities. Those are fun conversations I have with the Secretary. Not a single dollar for the more than 450 public entities that have anti-slavery public procurement obligations under New South Wales law. There's some great work going on. We're going to hear about some of that later today and into tomorrow. But again, it's all funded at the discretion of those agency heads. So you can imagine there's a variety of different levels of engagement and intent at the moment across New South Wales government agencies. Not a single dollar allocated specifically to anti-slavery work in the state budget papers, and we think that needs to change. We think also there needs to be resourcing of the critical needs of survivors, and in particular I mentioned there the expectation under the Act that there would by now be a system of support for victims of forced underage marriage, including accommodation regardless of whether that conviction had been secured for the perpetrator. That's all there in section 19.3 of the legislation. The legislation was passed in 2018. It's almost 2026. We haven't seen any movement on this. It's time for there to be movement on this. We would also like to see the government commit to engaging people with lived experience of modern slavery in all policy decisions. It was very disappointing that when the New South Wales Modern Slavery Committee reported out from their inquiry into the Modern Slavery Act and unanimously, including government members, recommended certain changes to the Act to enshrine survivor participation. Not only did the government decline to follow that recommendation, but it failed to consult with survivors before making that decision to go against a unanimous recommendation from the committee. So again, I think that's indicative of a lack of intent to commit to this work from government, and we think there needs to be a policy decision made that signals clearly from government that they will engage with people with lived experience of modern slavery in all policy decisions directly affecting them. A good first step, for example, would be for the Attorney General to commit, perhaps with other relevant ministers, to meet, say, twice a year with survivors of modern slavery. There needs to be strengthening of frontline worker training, especially police, as I mentioned, and we'd also like to see the New South Wales government do more to act as what we're now beginning to call a model contracting party in the management of modern slavery risks. So again, there's a lack of follow-through here. The legislation is built on a system that assumes there will be a direction from either the New South Wales Procurement Board, which is the group of departments that decides how to run New South Wales procurement, or from the Minister. There'll be a formal direction with the force of law requiring certain actions to manage modern slavery risk. Legislation was passed in 2018. As I said, it's almost 2026. We have no such direction in place, despite me bringing a draft direction to the Procurement Board 2 years ago. So we're seeing across the board a lack of follow-through from government to live up to its rhetorical commitments, and the next year is on all these kind of fronts really be a test as to whether the government is committed to following through and building freedom together. Now, I mentioned that one of the key focuses for us, both in government response and in our own work, is centring survivor voices. And so it's my great pleasure to cede the floor now back to Sarah, who's going to introduce to you an incredible piece of work that she's led really for about 2 years now, working with a number of people in this room, including people with lived experience. She'll tell you a little bit more about that. That's the lived experience engagement policy that's on your table. As Sarah will explain, this is our policy. It's the policy that governs our office internally, but we're publishing it because we think it's important that you understand the way we're going about this, and also that you have the benefit of it in your own work if it is of use to you. So congratulations to Sarah. I know this has been a long time coming, and over to you, Sarah.
Yes, it has been probably the better part of 2 years of my life, this piece of work. And usually when I tell people about my job title, I get a bit of a blank look. But as the lived experience practice lead, creating practices to engage meaningfully with people who have lived experience is at the centre of my work. It's really important to me to understand what words mean in reality and practice. I don't really like catchphrases that just become meaningless. So I'd like to unpack for a moment what engagement means to me and why we've developed this work that we're now calling the Lived Experience Engagement Policy. It has been the greatest privilege of my life, and one of the greatest challenges probably also, to work with the team at the office in this, what we're calling a disclosed lived experience role, that really seeks to bring together those survivor perspectives within a government context, basically, within a systems context. Sometimes I feel like those two worlds are very, very different, and it's almost a bit of a clash of worlds, almost a juxtaposition as to how those two things interact, the realities that we live as a survivor and the way that the systems work. So I think one of the things to acknowledge is how important it has been to work with people that have made space, that have been able to listen, able to hear from each other. When I started in this role, I didn't know anything about government. I had to have someone show me how to draw up a table on Word, for example, and they have held space. They've never made me feel like I don't know what I'm doing. In fact, they make me believe that I have expertise to share and that those things that I have to share can be valued and integrated into the work that we're doing. That's meant that we've had to move beyond just allowing survivors in the room, but to actually share power and allow those perspectives to shape the work that we're doing in a way that moves us towards partnership. Because I guess one of the things that I've learned as I've worked along this space is that as survivors, we have knowledge, we have things that we know are really impacting on our realities, but we don't have a lot of influence in the systems that are actually creating those realities in many ways. So for us to actually change the system, it requires us to work together with the system, which can sometimes feel like almost a betrayal when the systems have caused us such harm. I think one of the things that I think about with that point of engagement, how we come together, is about doing that in a way that is not just a single touch point, but rather that's a relational process that requires rigor and courage and care. And as a survivor working in government, my goal, I feel like policy is such an ugly word sometimes. I never want us to lose sight of our shared humanity, because policies, words on a page, and the wonderful comms team that helped me wrangle that into the format that it's in, that doesn't mean anything to us as survivors, at least, unless we see that humanity. It means that when we engage, we have to engage with integrity. We have to show empathy and hold for the lasting impacts of trauma on relationships in a way that allows us time to communicate meaningfully and to offer each other the grace to grow as we engage with some of the mistakes that might happen along the way, some of the things we might not see eye to eye on, some of the things around how best practice looks and trauma-informed approaches will continue to evolve. So it's not a place that we arrive at. This policy is not the end point. It's just the beginning of trying to come together to figure out how do we start this work and how do we make sure that when we come together, there is consistent practice, there is practice that we can rely on, that we know what it is that we're engaging in. Because as survivors of modern slavery, where our experience has been to be tricked, trapped, forced into situations, we don't want any kind of our engagement to replicate that. We want to give people clear understanding of what it is that they're engaging in and how that's going to look so that they can give informed consent, so that that engagement plays out in the way in which it was promised, that there is no force, no pressure, no coercion. None of the things are replicated that we see as harmful, or at least we want to work actively against those things to restore people's agency. This process was not an alone process. While all of the team at the office also helped me, we also had people with lived experience that worked with us from the start to think about this process. We did a workshop early on in this process to work with survivors and to talk about what does this look like? What do you think the process of engagement should look like before, during, and after an engagement? As we come to this next slide, you will see this is kind of the policy on a page. You'll see that it comes in 3 parts. That looks like the core documents, which is obviously the big policy document. You've got the charter, which is a bit more of an easier access way to navigate the policy itself, because we do want it to be clear and easy for people to look at and understand what is it that we're actually talking about. There's some consent forms for all of the different types of our work. One of the first things I did was go to the office and say, in which part of your work do you need to get consent from people, and how can we do that in a way that honours people's agency, whether that's as a recipient of services, like the support and assistance work that we do at the office, or whether it's participating in an event like this at the forum. We've also got other supporting documents, because one of the things that we've learned is that coming to something like this, there are so many barriers that survivors face to engage meaningfully. It might be that taking a day off work unpaid to come to an event like this means that that's a barrier and they can't participate, or they may not have travel supports. They may not have a car, they might not be able to drive, maybe catching public transport is a trigger for our trauma. What is it that's going to create a barrier, and what can make that what can overcome that barrier and support people to access the engagement opportunities equitably? So you'll notice that there's a long list of supporting documents that look like what sort of things can we put in place, for example, for travel supports, and how does the government fund that? Because, we have to justify our spending, so how can we justify that under our policy to actually be able to make equitable supports available to survivors? The other thing that you'll see in the 3rd column is the fact sheets. And again, this is about making the information available in bite-sized pieces so that people can really understand the different parts of our work. There's one on informed consent. There's some about the privacy and confidentiality agreements. There's some things about what does our support and assistance practice look like, and what does it look like to do an engagement activity where it is coming together as a participant to contribute expertise rather than coming for a service, and what can people expect to know and be able to be prepared for to engage safely and consistently. Last but not least is the remuneration aspect of this policy. For so long, survivors have been expected to share their expertise and their deep knowledge without being paid, without being compensated for the emotional contribution, the knowledge that they're contributing as expertise. So you will notice that we have 2 aspects of the remuneration policy, one being I call it a bit of a price list or a menu of the different types of engagement that we do at the office and the different ways that can be remunerated, and then also how we would pay for the access supports as well. I think, what does this look like in practice? I always come back to what does this look like in real life. I always say that developing this policy was like building a boat, and now the work is to really push that boat out to the sea and to see which leaks it springs. That's what I'm worried about. No, to kind of see that we are, what does it look like? Is it going to hold water? Is it going to be able to float? Is it going to do the things that we needed to do? And what can we learn and evolve as we continue to grow?